Welcome to episode 3 of the Gentle Finds podcast. I'm so happy to have you here, Tara. Thank you for joining.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tara Cosino is a clinical psychologist, a mindfulness meditation teacher, well-being researcher, and social entrepreneur. She currently works as a staff psychologist at Harvard University's Counseling and Mental Health Services. And she's the author of the book we'll be speaking about today called The Kindness Cure: How the Science of Compassion Can Heal Your Heart and Your World. I just wanted to tell you, I got your book actually a few years ago, and I picked it up and I brought it home and I had it sitting in the bookshelf for a while. And I think I bought it when I felt this sort of mounting cruelty in society, as maybe many of us did. And then at a certain point, we got hit with the COVID pandemic, the racial pandemic, and I went and I was drawn to pick up your book. And I was at the time wishing someone had answers to all of our problems. And your book really, I felt like, was a guidebook for really radically transforming our society for the better.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a tall order, but I'm glad that you were sort of pulled to read it. And
yeah,
well,
I was just looking at it thinking, if only more of us were reading this. It really is. It's a workbook at the same time as giving you the information that you need to motivate you to actually be a kindness warrior. Right?
Well, yeah, I think the term kindness warrior, I put it out there because we have to kind of, I don't want to say fight for it, but we have to commit to really adopting a spirit of generosity every day, because we are constantly confronted with challenges and with drama and with real threats, obviously with the pandemic, and it's an invisible threat. And so we have to actually really kind of almost like take it as a charge. Like, how can I bring kindness into my day?
Yeah. And so where did you actually get the idea for what was that moment that made you think the book was needed?
Well, I was raising teenage girls, actually. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been practicing for about 20 years. And so I don't know if I've always been practicing kindness per se. I mean, I do think that it is a value of mine, but there are things that can get in the way. And but I think what I was really asking was similar to what you were asking over this last year. I was just asking this question, like, what happened to kindness? Because they were just really, I think the pandemic at the time was the school shootings. We had the Boston Marathon bombing. All the spaces that we felt were safe were no longer safe. We had our bouts with mean girl situations, with my daughters. And, and one in particular who was just physically assaulted by another girl on the eve of senior year. And it wasn't like, part of me was like, well, thank God the other girl didn't have a knife, or that we lived in a different area. Right. I mean, you kind of think these crazy thoughts, like, but at the same time, it was like, is this how people are really being conditioned to deal with their problems? And so that I was like, what happened to kindness? It was just one of these sort of maternal frustrations.
Yeah, I felt the same thing. And maybe as a mother, you feel it even more. But yeah, it felt bombarded by cruelty in a way.
Yeah. And then as an adult at that time, because this is around 2016, when this was all really kind of sort of percolating up for me in the United States, at least, we were having a very contentious presidential election at that time. And so the discourse was very disrespectful. There was just a lot of bullying in public, and you know, hate crimes, just seemed to be popping up all over the place. And so I just felt like actually 2016 was a hard year. And so
Yeah.
a lot of this was coming to the forefront. And I was like, I'm going to do what I usually do, which is, when I have a question about something, I like to explore it and research it. So I think I just put on my research cap and said, okay, what does the research have to say about the human attitude and behavior about kindness? And so that's what sort of launched me into this exploration. And then I wanted to be like, but how can I deliver something that's really easy to understand, that can just be kind of taken in, like you said, not necessarily a workbook, but here are some skills to
Yeah.
practice, and take what you want from the book, but maybe there's something that really speaks to you.
It was really nice to see actually how deep you went with it, because I think that kindness is sort of something that is discarded in a way, as it's simple, be kind, you know?
Yes.
Um, but it's so much more than that, and it's so much more important than that.
Well, so I did take the tact of, okay, if most of us in when we're asked what we want in a partner, in a boss, to see in our children, to experience in the world, kindness is always at the top of the list, but it's
Yeah,
almost like the wallpaper. It's kind of like dismissed.
totally. Hmm.
And yet it is something, we grow up with this golden rule: be kind, to others as you would want to be treated yourself. And it's really important in every culture, and every tradition, every religion basically has this value and this sentiment. And at the same time, we also have this value, at least, where we are in the United States, for independence, and, fighting for what you want. And our competitive spirit is engaged often. There's sort of this, pull yourself up from the bootstraps kind of
Hmm.
mentality. And so there's these competing values in a way. And I think, what happens is that we get tripped up primarily because we're responding to the world based on our basic human architecture, right? Which is to survive.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why I was so interested in, well, what is the sort of the evolutionary sciences have to say about this? What do the social scientists have to say about this? And so I tried to dig a little bit into it, but not try to give the reader too much scientific information, but just to say, here's what we're learning now. And it's kind of pretty cool because we have brain imaging and, you know, ways to scan the brain to see,
Yeah.
what's going on physiologically
Right.
when you're exposed to compassion, um,
Hmm.
or you're exposed to hardship. And then what happens when you're taught mindfulness or
Hmm.
self-compassion and these techniques? Does that change anything? And
Yeah.
so that's what was really fascinating to me, is that, yeah, actually the science is backing up ancient wisdom here.
Yeah, and you speak about that it is actually, kindness is something that is a part of our humanity in our evolutionary makeup. And but you say we're under a spell, as you put it, right? That something is sort of wrong right now.
Well, I think it's, in a way, I don't think it's changed. Our
Mm.
responses to life hasn't really altered that much. I think our knowledge is getting more fine tuned if we're
Mhm.
aware. So, we do have this DNA.
Yeah.
Our brains are designed in a certain way to, first and foremost, be alert to danger, right? And so that's, that fight or flight response that you might have heard about,
Yeah.
is that we're going to react. It's almost unconscious. There's no thinking really involved. And
Survive.
we need that. We need that
Hmm.
so that we can jump out of the road when a bus
Yeah.
runs the light or something. Or we hear gunshots, or, like, that is our sort of radar system is going to be on alert. We have that, but we also have, and this is what sort of the anthropologists and the evolutionary scientists have shown, is that if it wasn't for mammals who are, nurturing, caregiving, because we have to actually nurture our young
Hmm.
for long periods of time, that we sort of evolved a nervous system to care
Hmm.
and cooperate. And our species actually would not have survived if the only mechanism was the fight or flight response. So
Yeah.
we developed this nervous system, this social nervous system, if you will, to care. And if you think about sort of even nomads, and early man roaming the landscape, is we had to carry children. There were small kinship groups. It wasn't really a nuclear family situation. Everyone
Hmm.
was caring for everybody else, and so we just developed this way of caring for one another as a way to ensure our survival.
Hmm.
So it's just as strong as the fight or flight um, mechanism, except it takes a little bit longer to kind of come online. And so we really have to then practice
Okay.
being kind, being generous, being thoughtful, learning how to, calm ourselves when we need to, learn to discern, is this really a threat or not a threat? And I think what's happened is
Yeah.
that our brains discern everything as a threat on social media and
Hmm.
all sorts of things when it's actually not. And we respond as if it's like the end of the world. So we have to really just
Yeah.
kind of learn how to manage.
There was a part that really struck me in the book where you said, you were speaking about someone else's research,
Mhm.
and it was that the negative sticks to our brain like Velcro, and that
Yes.
the positive slides off like it would with Teflon,
Right,
right?
that's Dr. Rick Hansen, who
Okay.
speaks a lot about sort of the neuroscience piece. He's a psychologist, but he's a
Hmm.
great teacher in terms of just really helping us understand. It's that there is this sort of like quirk in nature that we have this negativity bias. All of us
Hmm.
do, and the negativity bias is simply that our attention is going to be grabbed or hijacked by what we perceive as a threat, whether that's externally in the real world or whether it's in our own minds, like a
Hmm.
thought, right? And so we all have this negativity bias. And I think in some people, it just becomes more sensitized over time, depending on conditions, upbringing, stressors, trauma, those sorts of things. And so when we recognize that we've kind of, our attention has been hijacked by something that we're perceiving as dangerous or stressful or threatening, we can note that. Like sometimes I actually say to myself, "Oh, Velcro," you know, this is the Velcro, right? Yeah, it's just been sort of
That's a
like,
good, yeah.
taken, hostage by my own brain. And so
Hmm.
then you need to really take a pause. And so, um, to cultivate more of a positivity bias, what we really need to do is practice learning how to regulate our nervous system, so that
Hmm.
when we are triggered in some way or we're starting to feel a little bit of tension, that we can kind of take a pause, take a breath, recognize what's happening, name it, allow it to be there a little bit before going into reaction. I mean, unless really someone is, physically or bodily threatened, which is not really most of the time, we can just say, wait, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Feel our feet on the floor, take a deep breath, try to get, a little bit of distance. But that takes practice, and no one does, no one
Yeah.
teaches that to us really.
Not enough. Yeah, it feels like that's starting. What you've just said has given me so many more questions. Um, I'll start with, I love that you said it's like it's taking your brain hostage because it's this automatic response, whereas the positivity side, it's something that we need to take control of. We need to sort of be more aware, which is, I guess, where the mindfulness comes in. It makes me wonder a few things about upbringing. Like you said, what is it? How do you know when someone's nervous system has been sort of affected by this negativity bias so much that it, it's impacting their lives. So is it when someone is unkind, or is do they have other symptoms? Why is the
Well,
nervous
I think
system so
it's
important?
a really complex question because human beings come into this world with, I mean, it's just so multifaceted, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we can't help the families that we're born into, but
Hmm.
we could just come into the world with more sensitivity, let's say, to the
Yeah.
environment, more sensitivity to connection. And then there is, there's a lot of research in attachment, right? And
Hmm.
secure attachment or insecure attachment. And so, sometimes we are in a family where there's uncertainty or there's really stress or there's I don't know, neglect or abuse. I mean, we all have sort of something basically in our
Hmm.
conditioning, and sometimes there's a certain temperament that can be protective, or you've got a really wonderful friendship and friends that kind of buffer that kind of stress. So I would say there's no easy answer to this. um,
Hmm.
the more that I think that we are in stressful situations, it does affect our nervous system, right? Because then we're always in
Yeah.
sort of a threat position in a way, or kind of ready or hyper vigilant, or sometimes you just you numb out. you
Hmm.
know
That's another reaction, I suppose. Yeah.
So it's really about balance because, yeah,
Yeah.
kids need to go out and play and, have confrontations and have conflict. And I mean, this is how we learn to be resilient, when we rub up
Hmm.
against life. But that doesn't mean that you can't also have the caring and the connection. So I think there's just no easy answers. I think if someone's coming into adulthood and is having um, just trouble managing emotions or having healthy relationships, there's just a real opportunity to kind of take a look at all the things that could have um, created those conditions and then learn how to work with them.
Hmm. So thank God we have therapists.
Listen, sometimes, if you've got a good group of friends, you don't need a therapist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so I think it's, there's therapists, there's clergy, there's counselors, there's
Hmm.
mentors. I mean, gosh, the power of mentorship is so, so important. Or having one person in your life that
Yeah.
is going to have your back, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes that's all we need.
Definitely. Yeah. I think one person can make a difference. Absolutely. Um, Back to the idea of being a kindness warrior, and how it takes resilience to come out of this negativity, or people being cruel to you, or a mentor to help you through it. Um, there's an aspect to kindness. On the one hand, I think it's discarded because people think of it as a weakness sometimes. People will say you have a bleeding heart, or there's kind of a cynical attitude towards kindness sometimes. And on the other hand, I think kindness, after reading your book, actually takes a lot of strength. As you say, effort, but I think it's strength too.
Kindness is definitely what I would call an inner resource or an inner
Hmm.
strength, just like grit is,
Hmm.
or you know compassion, or calmness or playfulness, right? These are all inner strengths that help us in our lives. And yes, I think, sometimes I think we confuse being kind with being nice. Now,
Yeah,
a lot of nice people who aren't really actually very kind. you
that's
know
true.
and so, but if you think of kindness as more of I see it as both sort of a behavior and an attitude.
Hmm.
And and sometimes actually being kind is really about being kind to yourself and setting a boundary, right? And saying no. It's
Hmm.
not about, being weak or standing down or, being complacent. Um, Kindness often is about taking a stand and in sort of like a fierce kind of way.
Hmm.
And and we don't necessarily perceive it that way, but it is.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think, even in the leadership research, which is not necessarily tended to in my book, but there is some research that really shows that the sort of impactful qualities of a leader
Mm.
include mindfulness, compassion, and self-awareness. And I find that absolutely fascinating. This is with research with CEOs and, employees all around the world. And it makes sense because you can have those qualities of being mindful and, having sort of self-awareness and selflessness and compassion and still make really hard decisions.
Hmm.
You can still care for your employees
Yeah.
and have to, play hardball sometimes. So it is really, I see, a practice is how I see it.
Yeah. So you feel like you're still improving your your practice.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was a temper tantrum kid. I grew up in a household. I mean, talk about sort of like, adverse childhood experiences. I mean, I had,
Yeah.
my parents got divorced when I was 7 or 8. There was a lot of
Hmm.
conflict and strife. I mean, I could check off, on the ACEs measure, which is the adverse childhood experience
Yeah.
survey. Most of us could check off 1, 2, or 3 adverse experiences. Um, and we learn over time, right? And I have to say
Hmm.
that, my mother was very compassionate and very kind, but she was also very severe and very strict. My dad
Hmm.
was kind of like an irresponsible dad. He didn't even have the skill set to be a parent. I come to understand this later on in my life, obviously, through my own sort of self-development and work,
Yeah.
and sort of, probably picked this profession, to help heal childhood wounds, right? Um, but I would say like the last 5 or 10 years was really when I started to practice mindfulness.
Hmm.
And mindfulness is really a sort of a mental training on attention, in the present moment. What happens is we get caught up in the negativity of, say, the past,
Hmm.
regrets, or I don't know, just all the bad stuff that happens in the past.
Yeah.
Can kind of perseverate on it or ruminate on it, or we're really worried about the future. And so we're hardly ever actually present. And so mindfulness, which is an ancient tradition or practice, if you will, across all spiritual, and religious traditions, of really being present in the moment,
Mm.
calming our minds, not being in a place of judgment, learning how to kind of separate yourself from internal storytelling and things like that. And one of the sort of benefits of that is it does help with emotion regulation, because we don't get hijacked so easily
Yeah.
by
Hmm.
our emotions. And then the practice of mindfulness can't really sort of be separated from compassion, um, because compassion is really putting the heart into it. So in my book, one of the sections of my book is called kindfulness, which is
Yes.
really just another way to say, to kind of be aware of the present moment with heart,
Hmm.
right? I mean, because you could have, a very well trained Navy SEAL or sniper who's very mindful, aware in the
True.
present moment, right? Um,
Yeah.
so we really kind of need to have have both. And so, some mindfulness teachers will say, there's two wings, that of mindfulness and that of compassion. And I really like that metaphor, because we need both to kind of balance us out.
And would you say kindfulness is the combination of those two wings, or is
Yeah, I would say it is,
compassion?
and I feel
Okay.
like, sometimes, I think we've sort of, with mindfulness, it's just been so commodified.
Mm.
And so, I like the term kindfulness. Well, I didn't make it up. I mean, other people use it. I actually heard a kindergarten teacher use it. I mean, there's other sort of mindfulness teachers that will say kindfulness. And it just really resonates for me, because it then puts that generosity of spirit and that compassion in the forefront, if you will, right? Like figure
Hmm.
ground in a way. So I think that that's just so important for us to practice. And yeah, I practice every day. I mean, I try to say a little prayer to myself, like, may I be kind, today to myself and others, because we just can get wrapped up in the little things.
Yeah, and you've mentioned there's been little points where you've mentioned being kind to yourself, actually. And I went to your website and you have the kindness quiz. Do you call it the
Oh, yeah.
kindness
Yeah,
quiz? Yeah,
the kindness quotient. Yeah.
kindness quotient.
Yeah.
And I took that, and um, the first few questions were all about how kind you are to yourself. And I found that interesting because I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking, am I kind to others?
Right.
And then I thought about your book and how there's that idea that it seems that it starts with yourself and self-love, self-compassion, and then by creating that, you then radiate that. And it's contagious, actually, right?
Yes. So I would say, it's so fascinating to me because we learn kindness in relationship, right? So I go back to those, like, the early years and attachment experiences and sort of our DNA to really connect with one another. So we learn it in a relationship. I think what happens over life, and maybe starting with middle school, is that we start to really, the judging mind interferes,
Mhm.
and so we become pretty unkind to ourselves, especially in the way that we think about ourselves or we compare. And I think that sometimes even modern culture really amplifies that with social media and all the rating and ranking, and so now I think what we have to do is cultivate a relationship with ourselves. Right. It's, sometimes we call it spiritual reparenting. And it's not to say that you had bad parenting growing up, but
Yeah.
what happens is that we become so, um, in a way, we kind of abuse ourselves with our own thoughts, that we actually have to learn to be kind to ourselves. And when we can do that, and when we can really make that a practice, oh gosh, it's so much easier to be kind to other people. Just
Yeah,
as
because you
second nature.
recognize it.
Yes.
Yeah, it becomes a recognized behavior probably. I've I've heard it said that the way that you speak to your child, I'm raising an almost 3-year-old right now, and I've heard it said that the way you speak to your child becomes their inner critic, or inner encourager, inner
Yeah,
mentor, I suppose.
we do internalize the voices and the language of the people around us, and so our words really do matter.
Mm,
And yet we also have to be directive. It's not about just always being nice to your children. I mean, if they're misbehaving, they need to understand that that's not okay. Do they need to be, spanked for that? No,
yeah.
not necessarily. But I really go back to, gosh, 3-year-olds are so cute. I really just feel that Mr. Fred Rogers was a modern day mystic. And,
Me too.
I really, I mean, I could just go, my whole philosophy could go to, Fred Rogers. I have so much
I love
appreciation for
him.
him. But what he said, and he was obviously teaching preschoolers, is that feelings are mentionable and manageable. Like, that was sort of one of his mantras. Feelings are
Mhm.
mentionable and manageable. So as we're raising children and they're upset or they're hurting or they're angry or they bite their sibling, they're expressing, a feeling, and they might not necessarily have the words for it. And so as parents and caregivers, we can start help them name the feeling, and then direct them to ways to channel it. So I think that we don't really get that sort of social emotional learning ourselves, and then we're confronted as being parents, and it's so hard. And then talk about
Yeah.
negativity bias, or being triggered by stress and exhaustion and all those sorts of things. And so I think that it's another growth opportunity for parents. And often parents learn to, um this is going to go to my other term in the last part of my book, which is kindsight. Is
Mhm.
sometimes people really heal themselves when they become parents. This quality of trying to take a step back and put yourself in another person's shoes, right? That's sort of our traditional way of understanding empathy. Um, you know, uh, I have sort of little tricks that sometimes I do myself or I teach others is, when you're really confronted with, a difficult person or a boss or a roommate or whoever, is to ask yourself, like, what's the most generous thing that you can say about this person right now? And it might have nothing to do with you,
Hmm.
right? Oh, they must be really having a bad day. Or maybe they just don't know how to take another person's perspective on things. Maybe they're limited, you know. Um, so, and that's not to say that people are not accountable for bad behavior by any means, but
Right.
sometimes I think what happens is that we personally, we're designed to do this. We're, to really personalize things so much, and
Hmm.
and make it a conflict when sometimes whatever's happening interpersonally has nothing to do with you. They
Right.
might be having low blood sugar, they
Yeah.
might just have found out that they lost their job,
Hmm.
whatever it is. And so I think that sometimes we just have to kind of that's why take that sacred pause, take a breath, take a step back. Um,
Yeah. There are so many moments in our daily lives where that could help. I think of someone I know who sent me a photo of someone who had parked them in and left a note on the door of that person saying something to the effect of, thanks a lot, ruined my day or something. And I thought, well, what do you know about what's going on in that person's day? You
right.
know? It's just, yeah, to have that, to carry that with you of not knowing what could possibly be going on. I think about that a lot, all of the people who are in the hospital right now who have family members they don't know are going to make it.
I know.
And uh and we're cutting them off in traffic and saying cruel things to them, or you know, all sorts of things that make their day worse and not better.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
Um So, in the basket of kindness, kindfulness, kind sight, you mentioned the word empathy. And so, how does that fit in? And it's a very important word that's different than the others, right?
Yeah, it's so empathy is typically defined in sort of two ways. There's emotional empathy, and that's that experience of putting yourself in another person's shoes, right?
Hmm.
You're really kind of resonating. You're feeling the same feelings as that person. And then there's the cognitive empathy, which is, being able to see yourself, or, see that person's situation with a little bit of distance,
Hmm.
and really having a sense of perhaps caring but not necessarily needing to do something about it, right? We can imagine the plight of other people, right? So the cognitive piece is really we can imagine ourselves. So there's the feelings part and there's the imagination part, and we really need both, right? Because the psychopath out there might have cognitive empathy. They're very in tuned to what's going to
Interesting.
um, connect with a person, and yet they don't have the emotional empathy.
Oh,
So we
that's
need that.
scary.
Yeah, I know, it's true. So we need both. We need that, and we're
Okay.
designed to have both.
Hmm.
What happens though, is that, and this is where that word spell, which I coined for this book, which is that we get caught under a spell, and that really
Hmm.
starts to interfere with our natural ability to be empathic, and that stress really, but we protect ourselves, like, so spell stands for self-protective empathy.
Hmm.
Lethargy, like we're so exhausted or overwhelmed or upset that we can't even call on our natural ability to be empathic. And so that's empathic distress. It's often, what leads to burnout, say, in healthcare professions,
Hmm.
and so really with empathy, there's sort of an art and a skill of being able to move out of empathic distress, to the sort of, empathic concern. And this is really where compassion comes in. So compassion um, is the ability to recognize that somebody is suffering and having the desire, the wish to relieve their pain, right? That's compassion. And compassion does require actually that emotional distancing. And they've been able to kind of map this on brain scans, is that when someone's in empathic distress, like really feeling the pain, really being upset, you're seeing pictures of, starving children in some parts
Yeah.
of the world or whatever, and we just get, just our brain lights up, right? Our emotional centers light up. But with the practice of compassion is that you can have that emotional response, but your prefrontal cortex, the planning part of your brain, the part that can see things from a distance, gets engaged. And that's really adaptive. And so,
Mhm.
what we need to learn is how to kind of move from that empathic distress to really compassion or empathic concern. And this is really truly a practice, because it's just natural for us to be, we'll either be so upset or we'll just numb ourselves, like, when we don't notice the
Yeah.
homeless people on the street anymore, right? It's just like we can't even take it in, we've shut it out. It's, you know,
Yeah.
um, so
I know many people who do that. Yeah.
and it's hard. I mean, I am, very sensitive to those sorts of things, and I feel badly when I can't, I don't have $1 or $5 on me or
Hmm.
water in my car or something. um, and so then you have to kind of really think like, oh my gosh, there's so many people in the world, my heart is so open, the world's gone to hell in a handbasket, nothing I do is going to make a difference, right? I mean, that's really
Yeah.
where many of us go, right?
Yeah.
And then we get paralyzed, right? And so
Right.
I think sometimes, again, it's really this kindfulness, this mindfulness. It's like, oh, what really matters? What's rising to the surface for you the most? Where can you be of help? And often it's just really in your own neighborhood or your own community, which is really a good place to start, you know?
Yeah. You mentioned something about, and I don't have a direct quote, but touching if you're kinder than, well, first you say, um try to be kinder than you think you are,
Yeah.
right? And then that when you radiate that kindness, you often have influence on three people around you.
Right. So some social scientists have coined the 3 degrees of influence rule, which really kind of backs up this idea that emotions and behaviors and ideas and beliefs are contagious. Well, they are in a social network, whether that's online or offline. And so, if I'm kind to somebody else and somebody witnesses that or experiences that, the likelihood that they will be kind to somebody else, I might not even know that person,
Hmm.
um, it's more likely, and then so on and so on, and then somebody else's kindness come back to you. And so this idea that, so emotions are contagious. I mean, this is the
Hmm.
bottom line, whether they're positive or negative.
Right,
uh,
it can go either way.
it can
Yeah.
go either way. And so that's why being intentional and being mindful about what you're putting out into your world is going to reverberate. It
Hmm.
is. And we know this, like we know this in the workplace, you'd be working with a really cool set of people and there's that one person, man, they just, they just trigger everybody. Right. And, and we feel it, we feel it sometimes even before the person comes in the room.
Yeah,
That's how we
you
really are.
anticipate it. Yeah.
And we're connected. It's actually a physiological thing. It's like almost like a pheromone kind of thing, is my understanding from the research.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we can sense it.
Yeah, that actually makes me think about some people that I've been around that I physically have felt. Um, maybe I don't know what it is that I'm sensing, but I feel like they have a physical armor on them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so
Um,
we resonate physiologically. We co-regulate each other
yeah.
as human beings. This is why it's so,
Hmm.
so important that we're connected. And that's actually, coming to the pandemic, why it's been so hard for people is we've been sort of like extracted from our, physical social networks, and that really does have an impact on us because human beings do co-regulate, and we can sense when someone's being well, our own irritation or our own sense of tension is an important signal that there's something a little bit off here. And it's really important to kind of be attuned to that per
Mm.
se. And sometimes we have to make decisions in life, because I always, say to my daughters who are now in their early 20s, your friends can bring you up or they can bring you down. So choose wisely.
Hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of your life is a reflection of the five most important people in your life, right?
Yeah. It's true.
something to that effect. That, yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're telling your daughters. Pay
Yeah.
attention to who you're spending time with.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and since I work with so many college and graduate students, so I kind of have that whole span from 18 to like 32. And there's a real, sometimes a struggle or a challenge when you start making decisions about who you really want in your friendship group.
Mm-hmm.
And often it comes around to, is this person really, do you feel energized? Do you feel calm? Do you feel joyful in the presence of this person? Now we can't like get rid of our family members, let's say,
Right.
but we can actually,
I'm just kidding.
we can buffer ourselves,
Yeah.
with, you know, we can set boundaries and we can buffer ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good quote and to think about, well, who are those 5 people in my pod, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
that where you're really kind of, that contagion effect is, there's a mutuality that happens in that.
Yeah. And after everything that you've written, you sort of summarize it with this kindness manifesto, right?
Yeah. And yeah, which starts with sort of that we are wired to care. Like first and
Yeah.
foremost, when we recognize that it's really in us, it's in our DNA, we can only survive, in our relationships with
Yeah.
other people and being generous and collaborate. And so I just kind of threw in there, here's my recipe, and that we can actually really grow kind minds, at any time, in our lives. It just really comes with a sense of recognition and attention, and intention, if you will, to live a life in that way, and to really know that it's actually not weak, but it's incredibly strong.
Yes, definitely. I appreciate that. It's a message we need to hear more often. And where can people reach you, Tara?
Well, they can go to my website, which is, myname.com, so tarakuzno.com, or you can look up the Kindness Cure book.
Yes.
And probably you'll either come to an online bookseller, or you come to my website, because I have a book page there. You can take the Kindness Quotient quiz there. I also am a teacher on the Insight Timer meditation app, and so there's a bunch of meditations on there. I also have an audio course called Overcoming Perfectionism Through Self-Compassion, going back to our discussion about being kind to yourself. So I think there's lots of ways to find me.
Okay. I'll put all of your information on my website, gentlefinds.com, as well. And I'll just finish by saying that your book, The Kindness Cure, inspires people to take action with their loved ones, total strangers, and become a kindness warrior. This discussion has just given a tiny taste of what the book and Tara have to offer, so please go and check out her website and get her book to start doing the work.
Thanks for having me.